Hi, welcome to part 5 of my cybersecurity path. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm frequently asked about how I got started in cybersecurity and how I ended up as owner of a cybersecurity consulting firm, which I've been doing for the last 5 years. Now, my path is going to be different than your path and anybody else's path, but there's some commonality. That's why, even though I started out in this over 30 years ago, still kind of hurts to say that, there's still some commonality as to things in the beginning and as the path went on. As if you've seen any of the first 4 short episodes, you could probably identify with some of those things. So where I last left off, I was a network engineer working for the University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I had an opportunity to go to a place called Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I'd never heard of Murfreesboro. Murfreesboro is where Middle Tennessee State University is. In fact, this is a piece of paper from it. This is a master's degree in Information Systems Project Management, which I would receive in 2010. But right now in my journey, it's still 1998, so it's 12 years before this. And I would actually end up spending 12 years at Middle Tennessee State University. Well, the reason why I originally applied to Middle Tennessee State University is because they had an opening for a network manager. Now, I had progressed to the point where I wanted to do something more. I felt like that I was ready to have a team of folks underneath me. Now, not everybody wants to be in that position. Not everybody wants to be a manager. Not everybody wants to supervise people. I get that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's also nothing wrong with wanting to do that, and I wanted to do that. And this was still in higher ed, which seemed to be my niche in my career. As I mentioned before, I spent a few years at the University of Buffalo. That's where I started in IT. And then, of course, the University of Tennessee Medical Center, although it was a hospital, it was a teaching hospital, and there was still a significant college component to it. So I applied, and I ended up getting the job, obviously. Well, actually, my first day there, I remember I found a folder on my desk. The assistant manager, he had gone off, and the whole staff had gone off to a meeting, and the folder just had some information in there about, well, here you go, you have some information, you have a meeting this afternoon, at least you'll look official coming in with a manila folder. I'm thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? So Middle Tennessee State University was back then a large school, mostly a commuter school, but it was still a large school. It would eventually become the largest undergraduate institution in Tennessee, but it wasn't at that time. And the big problem that they had was they were having a lot of performance problems because it was a 3,000 plus or minus node network, and it was all flat. One gigantic broadcast domain, subnet mask 255.255.0.0 on their Class B. And I saw that as a challenge. Okay, I really enjoyed routing protocols, and I liked the fact that routing could segment off, that's why they use the word segment, different areas into different zones of traffic. We had a saying back then, it's probably still valid now, keep local traffic local. Now, that wasn't necessarily for security purposes, that was for performance purposes. Remember, this is still early in the days of campus-wide networks, so bigger than a LAN, but not a WAN, okay? A 3,000 node network, no matter where you go, even today, that's a large network. So my plan was I would go in there, I would create a plan to segment off the network, I'd move everything slowly off this big flat network into individual segments. And I could do that because fortunately the way that they had doled out the Class B, they had left significant chunks where they weren't using it. So I could take advantage of subnetting and really be efficient with that. Now that process took a few years. And my goal was I would do this, I would have this great network thing on my resume, and I'd then end up moving on. Remember, security wasn't on my radar at this point in time. Yeah, we did a little bit with ACLs and all that, but nothing major. My whole thing was networking, getting people to talk to each other. I did the project. It also involved like network monitoring via SNMP and some other items. We didn't really have Novell servers too much, if I remember correctly, but Windows NT was really becoming a big deal back then. Well, during the time, those few years of segmenting the network, for performance reasons, I realized we needed a firewall. Well, we didn't have a firewall. We had a router with ACLs, but we didn't have a firewall connecting us in the internet. That was the beginning of my security journey. Ended up investigating several firewalls, looked into and got a Checkpoint firewall on a Nokia IP440 platform. Some of you old folks might remember that. This is a very, very good setup, a very good platform. Took a little while for me to understand the difference between the Nokia platform and the Checkpoint software, because actually the Nokia platform itself too was really a router with a GUI, so you could do some firewall stuff on that in addition to what Checkpoint did, which of course was a lot more sophisticated, where you had rule lists, you had user groups, you could have groups of different IP addresses put together. So even back then it was pretty sophisticated. So it took a while, but ended up implementing that, and that became the first firewall for Middle Tennessee State University. Now, in the beginning, if I remember correctly, this was a very difficult thing, because the one thing you don't want to do in operational IT is break anything. So it wasn't as if that I could go in and do a default and do a policy with certain allows and then a default deny. Actually, I had to do it the exact opposite. I had to start by blocking stuff that were threats and then have a default allow. And believe it or not, to get to the point of flipping that around and having the default deny at the end was a very difficult process that I had to spend significant time talking with various campus leaders, department leaders, to get buy-in for. Now, this was not a bad thing, because this is where I'm learning another skill which really has helped me out in information security, and that is, well, really two skills. So soft skills with regards to communication and being able to explain, not from a techno-babble side, but from a business side, why we need to consider doing this. I had to be able to sell this. I also had to understand that IT, networking included, existed only to support the business. So whatever I did had to support the business. So even though I knew from the get-go, even when I first put the firewall in, even getting the firewall took some time to get in. But I said, okay, we'll get it in as block, 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 default allow, and then eventually we changed it to the other side. Eventually got the buy-in. The way I did that was, you probably already know what I'm going to say, I had a rule to look at, well, what kind of traffic did we have, and spent really the better part of about a year investigating what was going through, what we really needed, what we could block, and what we had to actually let go through. So when all is said and done, by the time I was done, I had a pretty liberal firewall policy, but at least I had a default deny at the end. That was the beginning of my cybersecurity journey, because that was the beginning of when I was really starting to concentrate more, not on getting things to connect, but getting things to not talk to each other. And I'll pick that up in episode 6.